Do you go to school to learn all these stuff, or is that something you learned at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, or?
I mean, general knowledge, sure, but specific to waterfront, no. I think engineers have a greater advantage in terms of specialization within their disciplines than architects do, and that's maybe something that, a trend that will change is having specialized architects, whether in, waterfront or healthcare or whatever it is. I do see an advantage to having specialization within the field, even though architects are seen as generalists. But yeah, I didn't have a, highly technical understanding of waterfront infrastructure when I finished architecture school by any means.
You did not. And how about engineering school, the civil engineering? Did that help you?
So still, I mean, it certainly helped me, but again, not in terms of my specialty area. I think in terms of my way of thinking. But if I had gone to school for marine engineering or coastal engineering, then yes, absolutely. But my path was just a little bit different.
How did you learn what you know now?
Largely through experience. I mean, open to learning, taking on different opportunities. But first project I was put on was Staten Island Ferry Terminal, and from there it just became a theme of working on waterfront projects and learning the nuances the doors that open that way.
Why did you choose New Jersey Institute of Technology?
For me, it was a filter, like I said, about being able to study architecture in a 5-year program that would enable licensure and playing Division One soccer, which there aren't actually that many schools in the country that offer that, and some that do. On paper, the coaches wouldn't necessarily let me study architecture and play Division One soccer.
So it was a combination of what really mattered the most to you, I guess.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit more about the, main projects or major projects that you guys have delivered or led by Indigo River. I have here the East Side Coastal Resiliency in Manhattan as one of these projects. There could be others. Uh, so yeah, let's talk to me a little bit about these prime projects that you've led.
Yeah, sure. So I wouldn't, by no means have we led Eastside Coastal Resiliency. We are a team member on the team, and it is a very large team led by Lero and HNTB, and our scope is very specific on that project. We have been supporting, looking at the maritime logistics, the sequencing of barge operations during construction. So that's, very highly specialized scope. Other projects that we have led, we are the prime for the Governor's Island demolition and reconstruction of Yankee and Lima piers. We've also been a subcontractor on the Tango Pier project. Similarly, on Governor's Island, we've worked with Robert De Niro and the Wildflower Film Studios to redevelop the water's edge, as well as the flood mitigation strategy for the studios themselves. Other projects that we work on, we are active within the offshore wind industry, so offshore wind port development as well as workforce development, because we are one of the earliest to enter into the space. We work on battery energy storage systems on barges as well. We, on the small scale, we'll use training opportunities of, a backyard residential dock to enable recreational access, or a seawall, kind of smaller site project. So we work at multiple scales all along the waterfront with all different types of clients, public and private. We'll prime projects, we'll be a sub-consultant on projects. We are a women-owned firm, so we often work on government projects that fulfill the women-owned criteria. So yeah, a little of everything.
What's your favorite? What's your favorite type of project? Among all of these that you just mentioned.
I actually really, hard to say one. Something that I found that I enjoy greatly is being able to work on different scale projects and different types of projects with different clients. And so it's one thing to talk with government clients who are in the industry and know what they want, with peer consulting groups that are, other architects and engineers. And it's another thing entirely to talk to a residential owner about their construction of a dock, and they don't even have a boat yet. They don't know what boat they want, but they want to interact with the waterfront, and they, need advisory services all around. And so it's switching scales and switching vocabularies that I enjoy a lot.
Oh, okay. So, are you good at sales? I should ask. Do you like doing sales? When
Not
talking to a
particularly.
customer when
I
talking to
mean,
a customer that doesn't know what he wants, is just like he
I
thought
mean,
it's.
I will say, and not from an egotistical point by any means, but I do like educating people who don't know about the waterfront, about what the constraints are, what the risks are, to be able to advise and to help them. And so it's not always our team coming in and imposing what we think is best, but it's really a process of discussion and kind of interviewing what their priorities are, what their budget is, what their schedule constraints are, and also conversations with contractors about means and methods to kind of negotiate what that design will be in the end.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. And do you live in a waterfront property?
I do. I live on the Hudson River.
You do. Do you like it? Do you recommend it for the future?
I do. And so again, for me, looking kind of back at my history, I grew up in Alaska, very immersed in nature. And I think, I took that for granted. And then when I was at school in New Jersey, I was kind of in a concrete jungle, and I didn't know what it meant to miss nature and not have that, and how important it was to me. And so even then, having a career in New York City, and I worked in the Middle East for a portion, not having that connection with nature on a recurring basis was a challenge. And so finding it at the water's edge, anywhere there's water, there is nature, is certainly something that I appreciate and enjoy. And certainly living on the waterfront, there's an immediate connection to nature, regardless of how dense the environment is that's developed around you.
Very interesting. So you worked in the Middle East. Where exactly do you work?
I worked in the desert in Israel.
Oh, really?
I did. I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers on a project over there for about a year.
How interesting was it? I mean, it's a desert.
It was. It's the one kind of non-waterfront project that I worked on, but certainly learned a lot professionally, culturally, personally, and was able to develop in different ways.
I mean, these are contrasts, right? From waterfront to desert, and then waterfront is just very, very interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, tundra in Alaska, desert in the Middle East, urban New York City, waterfront harbor, very different.
Very, very different, very interesting. So, Dena, from your perspective, what are some of the more critical challenges we're facing today in the industry, back to the AEC industry in general?
So certainly, I believe our ability to adopt new technology is a hindrance. We take very long compared to other industries to adopt new technology, and it's understandable why in terms of the tools that we use, but it's a dynamic moment in time where the tools are changing out from under us, and we have rapid development in the incoming workforce of what their skill sets are, what they know how to use, how efficient they are at using them, and some of the tried and true old school methods, and there's pros and cons of each, but negotiating that in terms of a business and managing a business, and how quickly do you adopt AI into your practice, what are the liabilities thereof. There's a lot to be discovered and a lot to be teased out. And so I think certainly themes of how to engage and adopt technology safely and responsibly is a challenge. And similarly, there are individuals outside of the industry that are adopting a lot of these tools but don't have the expertise that architects, engineers, contractors do have, and there's a danger in that as well that worries me. And so that's something that I think it's a responsibility of our industry to be looking and involved in the development of the tools that we're using, specifically different areas of technology.
Tools like what, Dena? Can you be more specific? Tools like what?
Sure. So, I mean, it could be, running calcs in a new software package. It could be embracing artificial intelligence in terms of writing meeting minutes. It could be, code lookup tools that are not fully vetted. It could be design software that rapidly spits out images but are not tied to a deeper thought process. There's a danger in that. So there are a lot of different types of technologies that are out, and there's also hardware of drones and different things that make more efficient manpower, but there's inherent liability in using some of those methods of not having your eyes, not having a tactile touch on a structure and inspecting it only through the lens of a camera. And so those are things that as we evolve, I'm sure we'll iron out, but the pace at which we develop and adopt these technologies, I think, is a concern.
Are there any regulations right now around the adoption of these tools and putting them into action? Limitations?
I would say regulation is another area that is a cause for concern, the ability at which regulation changes, because I mean, even you look in other industries of how and when regulation is adopted and when code is written, and it's often reactionary. And so just because there's not a regulation in place yet doesn't mean that something is safe or that you won't be held liable for it. And so there's an awareness around getting ahead of those thought processes as well.
There is an area of concern, especially that it's moving really, really quick. Tools are evolving and advancing very, very quickly, and I don't think we're reacting at the same pace and
Yeah.
regulating and organizing how we're using these tools and how we're adopting them. But aside of the tools, are there any other challenges that you're afraid of, you're concerned of for the future in the industry today?
I wouldn't say afraid, and maybe not even concerned. Maybe that's harsh or strong, but certainly important to have an awareness around. We look at the values of generational change and the generations that are coming into the workforce, and we look at the historical values of the generations that are retiring from the workforce, and they're in two very different places. And so bridging that gap and creating work environments, I think that can appeal to all, or can appeal to the individuals that are appropriate to the practice, is a challenge and is a area that requires, repeated study.
Are we short-staffed today in the industry? Do we have enough people to fill all the need out there?
Well, that's a trick question. Enough people, yes. Are the people calibrated with what the market can afford? No. And does that mean that's the market's fault or the business model's fault? Questionable. But I think there's plenty of work to be done. There's plenty of wonderful and rewarding work to be done. I don't feel that architects are valued. I think the architecture, engineering, construction at large could benefit from retooling and re-examining their business models to be able to afford, top talent and not have attrition to other industries of engineers and architects that go into whether technology or other areas that maybe in the short term are more appealing, but there is a detriment to society when we don't keep the high caliber of individuals within the profession and develop them.
Why aren't we able to keep these high talented individuals within our AEC industry? What's going on there? What's broken in today's model?
I could certainly look at several classmates that left architecture and they were, top designers and could have gone into practice and been very successful. But you look at and you understand what the motivating drivers are, and you look at student debt coming out of school, and you look at a salary that's threefold to go work in technology versus in practicing architecture. It's pretty clear why there are motivations and why the attrition occurs. It's hard to motivate only out of passion when the economy is shifting greater in a greater dynamism than it ever has before, and it's affecting the younger populations and the younger generations.
Who's hoarding all the cash? Let me ask you the question straightforward. Because properties are skyrocketing, right? Property cost is it's off the roof. It's ever increasing. Real estate is not cheap, right? We have a surging demand for housing, probably not for commercial, but for residential real estate. It's all-time high, probably, the need out there. So it's not like the costs are really, really low and the margins are very, very skimmed down or slim. So who's keeping all the cash? If the engineers and architects are not getting it, who's getting it?
You look at the licensing for the software and who's developing that software. You look at the other industries in general of, how much social media influencers make and what is their impact on society comparatively. You look at just the insurance rates, the insurance premiums on some of these properties. There are a number of ways and areas that I do feel the architecture and engineering as professional services primarily could reassert their value and make their case in terms of a business model as a value proposition, and not necessarily in terms of an hourly model or a flat fee that then is taken advantage of by a developer.
How do we correct that? How do you correct that problem?
It's a good question. I do believe it's not, in my case, what we work on is that value proposition of you just want the cheapest solution. That's not going to be us, but you're going to get the cheapest product as well, and it's not going to have the right it's not going to be aligned to the strategy of the firm. And some firms don't care. Some developers just want to flip a property. They don't care about the long-term viability of the asset. And that's a really dangerous outlook. They don't care about whether or not the property will be flooded, whether or not it could, lose lives. They're looking to flip the property and make a quick buck. And those are typically not the types of clients that we like to work with.
You don't always get to choose. That's the problem. You're at the end of the day, it's a project out there and you need to keep going. So you don't really always have the luxury to choose what kind of property or what kind of project to work on.
It's true. We don't, but we do focus on projects that are aligned to our mission, which do often involve climate adaptation measures, which are not purely driven by financial models. They're driven by other metrics and other values, longevity and resilience and sustainability and environmental awareness that typically aren't always the same as a given developers. Not all developers. We have some great developers that we work with, but there are, developers that just want to hire an architect, have them do what they want, not ask what the architect's expertise is or understand the value that the architect can bring. They just want, a permit set, signed and sealed and delivered.
Mm. So, on previous episodes and talking to other leaders in this industry, they spoke a lot about, that there's a gap somewhere there with the developers themselves, because the developers are not always, but primarily driven by maximizing how much the return is on each and every one of these projects, right? And in some instances, they just would care probably a little bit less about how the climate adaptation is or the resiliency is for that particular property. Have you faced similar situations, and how do you usually balance it?
So typically, if we're working with a new client, whether private development or public, sometimes it's more explicit in public work what the scope of work is and what the values are and where the budget is, and that's more transparent up front. But sometimes when we work with private developers that we haven't worked with before, we don't necessarily jump all in day one. We'll likely start with a due diligence analysis or development of a design criteria before we even sign up to design anything. Or permit anything, or sometimes we'll only be brought in to help with a permit that someone else has designed, because again, it is highly specialized on the waterfront to be able to go through the regulatory process. So it depends, but I would say in terms of what we work on and who we work with and mitigating our own risk is not necessarily to jump all in with a new person that we've never done business with and or don't know their values or don't know where they're looking to develop their project.